Hi everyone. So I wanted to make a quick little introduction before the main portion of this video begins. If you didn't know, I'm in the process of obtaining Austrian citizenship due to a new immigration law that was just passed last year. The Austrian embassy website writes, quote, "In October 2019, the Austrian parliament unanimously adopted an amendment to the Austrian Citizenship Act, Staatsbürgerschaftsgesetz, in recognition of its historical responsibility toward the victims of National Socialism and their descendants. Persons who were themselves victims of the National Socialist regime can already acquire Austrian citizenship. If this applies to you, we would ask you to directly contact your local Austrian diplomatic representation." And then it has a little sentence about that. But this is the important part for me. According to the new 58C, paragraph 1A of the Austrian Citizenship Act, descendants of victims of the National Socialist regime can acquire Austrian citizenship by means of a declaration, which is called Anzeige in German, without having to give up their current citizenship or nationality in return. So, I'm currently waiting for Austrian citizenship, which is crazy to say out loud. In March, when I first found out about this opportunity, I joined a Facebook group for people going through the same process, and I met a woman named Kendall. She's around the same age as me and happens to share the same level of enthusiasm that I have about this whole process. The idea that we will soon become dual citizens is just mind-blowing to think about. We've been texting back and forth for months, and we thought it was finally time to meet virtually on Zoom and have a chat about all things Austrian. So this is our chat. Sit back, relax, maybe grab some schnitzel and some beer, put on your Dirndl or lederhosen if you have any at the ready, and enjoy. We just thought that we would record a video for YouTube today because there's no Austrian content on YouTube, not enough at least. Whenever I search for Austrian content, I found like one video about this immigration law, and that is pretty much it. So yeah, I met Kendall in a Facebook group for descendants of people who were persecuted during the Holocaust, and we are now eligible for Austrian citizenship, which is so surreal to me still.
Yeah. It's pretty much consumed our lives.
Yeah. Pretty much. It's such a surprise during quarantine. It's wild that we're in a pandemic and we're becoming European. So yeah. Crazy times. So yeah, I just have some questions that I sent to Kendall before, and yeah, we can just talk about our obsession with becoming Austrian and all of that.
Finally an outlet. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to just talk about how we discovered this opportunity? Like, how did you've told me through messaging, of course, but let's tell everyone else.
So I'll start. A few years back, I looked into Austrian citizenship because I've always been aware that like most European countries do some sort of citizenship through like descent, or like if you had a grandparent who held on to their citizenship. And when I was living in California, I reached out to the LA consulate with just kind of like a generic form email to say, hey, is this a possibility? You know, my grandmother was Austrian. She left because she had to. Is there any law or any like amendment to a law that allows her to get her citizenship back, and then any of the descendants? And they were really nice, but they basically just said no. And so this might have been, I think this was at the end of 2018. Okay. And so I had no idea that anything was in the works, or that there were a lot of groups like advocating for this law and a lot of work had gone into it. I was totally unaware of that. So then cut to like February 2021. So it was this year. I was sitting, I had just woken up and I was having coffee, and I was reading one of those articles on travel and leisure that's like, if you had a grandparent who came from this country, like you're eligible for citizenship. And so it's like Ireland and a few other countries in Europe. And so I was reading through it, and I got to the end and I got like sort of angry by it, because I was like, okay, so if these people won the descendant lottery for European citizenship, like, isn't it ironic that like we're in the group of people whose ancestors had to leave, and yet like we aren't in that same category to like get this benefit? So anyway, I ended up looking on the Austrian embassy's website just to like reread the law. And when I got to the homepage, in like bold letters was the announcement for the law that had been passed in September 2020, talking about people who
Yeah.
either feared political persecution, or who were Jewish and had religious reasons, and all the other things that came with it. And I looked at the dates, and I like almost couldn't believe it. My boyfriend was at the gym, and so I like pulled up my laptop and was looking up the requirements and everything. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm eligible for this. Like this is exactly what I asked for years ago. And so it was really hard to believe. And then I kind of like went down, the spiral of like, I found the Facebook group, like, then I kind of like opened up to, I was like, okay, a lot of people are aware this is going on and like they're already in the process. And so it like from that moment on, like my sights were like dialed in to figuring out what I needed to do for that citizenship. And what was yours like? I know that you kind of stumbled upon it too.
So random. Yeah, I feel like, as you said, like a lot of people have been tracking, and yeah, a lot of people have been keeping track of what's going on. And yeah, I never thought this would be a possibility. I'd heard of German, like, German descendants, but I was like, that doesn't apply to me. And I've had like a Germany kind of obsession for a while because I have a really close friend in Germany. And so I've watched a lot of like cultural comparison videos. I know a lot about German culture, like random things now.
Well, there's a lot more available for it too than Austrian.
Like, there's a whole niche on YouTube of cultural comparison videos, and these people get quite a lot of views. It's really interesting. I think Germans really like hearing about like how others view their culture. I've noticed that like all the comments are mostly German men. I've noticed like just really liking hearing like American women talk about their experience in Germany. But anyway, that's a tangent. So yeah, I was randomly watching this video about how this like Danish man obtained German citizenship. And I was like, and then he mentioned the descendant law that didn't apply to him, but he just like mentioned it offhand. And I Googled, I was like, I wonder if anything like that could possibly exist for Austria. And then the law came up, like it was the first thing. And this was, gosh, the timeline is all a blur, like in March this past March. So, the law had been passed in September. So pretty, soon after. And then I think that day, I found the Facebook group, and I think you messaged me, like one of the first people that messaged me, because I was just in shock. I was like, this must be not applicable to me. Like, I don't know. I just didn't think. So, some backstory to share with everyone. Like my grandfather escaped Austria in 1938, as did my great aunt. But I never knew my grandfather. He passed away 3 years before I was born. But, I grew up, I wish I could have known him, especially through this process. Like, I really wish I could have known him. But what was I saying? So yeah, I don't know. Austria was never like I knew about our history, but I don't know. I just didn't think this was a possibility. Long story short.
Sure. Well, and it's connected you a lot more to it, I'm sure, through the process.
Yes. So I'd been to Austria when I was 14, but I don't remember it being like that meaningful. Like we went to a lot of other countries.
Yeah.
So I feel like I've lost my train of thought, but yeah, I found out on Facebook and I applied like within the next 2 weeks. Like my mom and I were both applying, and we gathered all our documents, and we were just like very efficient and got it done.
Yeah, I was really excited when you joined the group too, because a lot of people were already like way in the process, and I felt like I was having this like very much like a movie script moment where I'm like looking around going like, wait, I can become Austrian or like European. And I didn't have anyone who like was expressing the same kind of emotion like outwardly in the group, or who was like, like it was their grandparent. A lot of people in our group, it's like their parents or things like that. And so I was like, oh, she just found out too. We're kind of on the same page with being like, whoa, we're stuck at home. We've got nothing else to think about. But the fact that like, after we get these official documents sent off to like the State Department and everything, we're like under consideration to become European. Like it was kind of surreal.
So surreal. And the process seemed like too easy. I was like, so I don't have to, like, we're both learning German, but I was kind of learning German before I even knew about the Austrian citizenship idea. Cause I have a good friend there, and I've just been like very into German culture and learning the language. I mean, I'm still very much a beginner, but trying.
Same.
So yeah, I was just surprised that you didn't with, I think, the German similar law, you have to pass a test, like a
Yeah.
language test and a culture test. And for this, we just had to gather some documents. It's still, a process of apostilling everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just felt like, I was like, so yeah, I don't know. The idea that we could be dual citizens, I was like, wait, am I going to lose my American citizenship? Like, it just was all very new at the time. So
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about that too is I've done a lot of research about living in Austria before because it had always been part of my plan to move there.
yeah.
Probably in my 30s. There's a lot like I wanted to like it's a big move. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to have like a certain command of German. Like I've looked up the requirements for residence before I knew that I would have any sort of like pathway to get there.
Yeah.
And you did have to pass a language test. There were just a lot of hoops to jump through. Like you had to be more skilled than other workers in Austria or bring something to the table, that they wouldn't have. And so it was a lot. And so I had looked into it before. And so it almost felt like when that opened up, I was like, hold on. Like the hardest aspect of like me wanting to move to Austria has just like the door has just opened wide, there it is. That's the missing piece to go over there and kind of have all that settled. So it almost felt like a huge relief because I've looked into this so much and I've already had it on my mind. Like, okay, if I want to move to Europe, it's going to be like a really big task to figure all these things out. And then it was like almost too easy. How little we had to do in terms of like supplying them the documents and what they were going to do in terms of research on our behalf and everything. So it did not feel like it was happening to me.
Yeah. So crazy.
Yeah.
And for me, I'd looked up just out of curiosity, like how to become European, like before, because I love shows like Emily in Paris and I love rom-coms set in Europe. And I just love the idea of going to a different country with a new language. So I just researched, but not as seriously as you, like you were really, like going to go through.
Well, I was like dialed in on Austria, ironically enough. So it was kind of like whoa, like this is perfect. But I still have the same, like you were talking about, like romanticizing being in Europe and everything. I was like, okay, if not Austria, like how do I end up in all these other places that, seem really enchanting to be in?
Yeah, for 100%. And do you want to talk a little so how do you have a connection to Austria?
Yeah, so I guess that's the most important piece. Austria has always been a really big piece of my identity and my family's. I was very, very close to my grandmother, my Omi, and there's a lot to it. I always knew that she was from Austria. We had Austrian traditions in our home. I grew up eating Grießnickel soup and listening to opera. And the part that didn't really come later for me was that I always knew that she left and I knew that there was a darkness there. But it wasn't until I got older and I was in high school and I was doing projects about the Holocaust, or, I grew up right outside of DC. So we would go to the Holocaust Museum, like for field trips and things like that. And it wasn't until like that part of my life started that I realized like there was more to her love and like her relationship with Austria. So as I started to learn more about that in her life, it made my connection even deeper. Like I knew that, I learned that I always knew that her dad had been taken by the Gestapo when she was young. I always knew that it was just her and her mom, that when they lived in Austria, they had a really, really difficult time with the occupation of, not only Germany, but then, the Soviets, and it was just really tough on them. But it's just always been like a really big fabric of my life to my grandmother. German was her native language. It was where she came from. It was such a big part of her. And she had a really hard time with the fact that like she really liked being an American, but so much of her identity and background was being Austrian. And she just really lit up with that part of her life. Like she always dressed me in Dirndls when I was little. And, our Austrian family was a big part of our life. And so it's just always been really special to me for her as well. And so like, it's always been something that I wanted to share with her and to learn more about. And it wasn't really until I did the citizenship that I got like really granular into the details
Yeah.
of like dates and like what actually happened. And, in a few years ago, 1994, my uncle did a series of tapes with my grandmother and kind of interviewed her, and they've been transcribed. And so I've always had that in my possession. And
Yeah.
that goes into a lot of detail about like where she lived in Austria and who her neighbors were. And so through this process of going through the citizenship, like I've read a lot about those people and where they ended up and things like that. And then I kind of understand why my childhood with Austria was more of like, which I know we're going to get to later, more of like the
Yeah.
sound of music and Milka and Monoshtin and like soups and, singing O Tannenbaum at Christmas. And it was less of the hard part of her relationship with it.
Right. All the good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, like I've said, like, well, I didn't say this, like, I'm Jewish, and Judaism has always been like a part of my life, and knowing about the Holocaust and all of that and what happened. But Austrian culture, not so much. Like I'd seen pictures as I grew up. I didn't learn any German, like no German was cast on. My mom knows how to say like, ich bin Nina, and that's like it. So German wasn't on my radar. I just saw pictures, and I always had a fascination with pictures from that time. And we actually have quite a lot of documents and just like evidence photography from their life in Europe. Like you'd think there wouldn't be, like, I'd say we have way more from my mom's side of the family versus like my dad's side, who's not from Europe. And so yeah, our garage is kind of like a messenger museum. So that's my mom's maiden name, and my grandfather's last name. And so yeah, it's really interesting. As you were talking about your traditions, some of them don't even ring a bell for me, like the song you said and things like that. But yeah, through this process, I've uncovered a lot more information too, and just kind of when I applied, I want to say this: my great aunt was still alive. Who was my persecuted ancestor, my grandfather's sister. So she passed away from COVID. How long has it been? Like 6 months? Time is a blur right now, but really recently. She was 97. So, she lived a really long life. But yeah, even I had the opportunity to interview her like a month before she passed about her life in Austria, which I'm really glad I did.
And she had mixed feelings about you applying, didn't she?
Feelings, yeah. She didn't like outwardly tell me, but I heard through other people. And she, well, even on the phone when I did tell her about the opportunity, I was so excited, but I understood that this is a really complicated thing for people, especially, a person who had to escape. I understand that, there'd be a lot of mixed feelings. So she wasn't angry or super upset, but she was just like, why would you want to take that opportunity? Aren't you like content being American kind of vibe? Which I totally can imagine from her perspective. Because America was really, really great for her. I think it was their first choice of places to end up. And I think we found that document, and I think it was like America was their number one choice, and it worked out. And yeah, I think she felt really safe here. She went back to Austria at least a few times. Like she had some connection there, but she never wanted to move back or anything like that.
Sure.
Her father did move back. He wasn't, I think, so content here, and for like work opportunities, he ended up moving back.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. I'm forgetting, like my mom and our family knows the details better offhand, but so he did move back. And I think my great aunt like visited him a couple of times there. But anyway, yeah. So I grew up knowing my great aunt, not my grandfather. And, she lived in Chicago, and I'd see her like once a year growing up when we go there for the holidays.
Now, did your grandfather, like via your mom, did they have any Austrian traditions growing up, or did your mom just feel kind of like American or assimilated or more Jewish, like in their traditions?
I think way more Jewish. Like to my knowledge, I don't know of any Austrian traditions, at least none that I've been a part. I can ask her. But yeah, the language was definitely not passed on, because I think they just really wanted to start over and be American. But yeah, I grew up, I'm not super religious, but like culturally religious. I grew up going to synagogue, and we're Reformed, so which is like I don't know, the most like chill level of Judaism. Like we went to the holiday services. I had my bat mitzvah, but yeah, mostly like culturally Jewish with the foods and everything.
And how old was your grandfather when he left Austria?
He was 17. So he was 17. He went to Palestine, it's now Israel.
Yeah.
And he was on a kibbutz for a year, like picking oranges. So I grew up, even like when I say this, it's almost like a memorized speech. Like I've heard like, oh, he went to Palestine for a year, then he went to America. Yeah, so he was super young when he left, and he left separately. When he went to Palestine, he went alone, which is like,
yeah,
crazy to think about when I think of myself at 17. And then he reunited with his parents who were able to get out, and his sister, so my great aunt who I grew up with.
Yeah. And did he speak English before he got to America? Do you know?
Yes. I'm not sure. That's a good question. I'm not sure about his like level but I think they were exposed to quite a few languages. Like they were really educated in Vienna.
Yeah.
Like we haven't even shared that. Like both of our relatives, both were applying through people who lived in Vienna. And so I think my great aunt, she was exposed to like French and Latin and like all these languages. But I don't know the level of proficiency when they came here. It's a good question.
Yeah. I was really unaware of my grandmother's level of proficiency when she got here.
Yeah.
But then I kind of pieced together and also remembered that she was a translator for the army before she left from Vienna. So she was definitely fluent when, before she even got here, which really gave her an advantage. But through her life, I know that she was fluent in like 4 languages. And then in a few, she could definitely, get by or speak more than the average person. And I have to think that a lot of them came, because she could speak French. And I have to think that came from education in Vienna as well, because they're just exposed to so much more worldly people and experiences than we are here necessarily. Like it's really rare that you find somebody else who knows another language here who didn't study it on their own, or have like their family speak another language. So I have to think that both of our grandparents had some level, some good early practice in Vienna.
Yeah, I think so. And from stories I've heard from my mom and my family, like my grandfather was like very language obsessed. I think he was like teaching himself Japanese, toward the end of his life. Like, I think he just like really picked up things really quickly. And just my great aunt as well. Like she was very intelligent. And like, I wonder also, like I've heard of studies of if you speak more than one language, like you are less likely to develop dementia and things like that. And I think that's super interesting. Because she was so sharp. I think it's a lot of different layers. It's not just because she was many languages, but I think
definitely motivation though to learn another language.
Definitely, yeah. And just it was a very like academic family. They were very education obsessed.
Well, your grandfather was he a professor?
Yeah, he was a professor at. I'm gonna get this wrong. I'll put it on the slide. I think it was the University of Chicago. In Chicago, electrical engineering. What can you remind me? So how old was your grandma when she left? You might have already shared this.
So she left so her story is a little more complicated. I actually applied. Well, at this point, I'm not really sure who I applied through, given my communication with the authorities in Vienna. However, I was technically eligible through both my grandmother and her dad. And so her dad, he was he was really arrested by the Gestapo, of course, unjustly because he was Jewish. He was arrested in 1939 on a random night. My grandmother never saw him again, so they took him from the house. I know that my great grandmother was able to go visit him in jail and bring him clothes and things like that. And he was released on the condition that he had to leave Austria. So the way my grandmother has retold it via these tapes and interviews that we have is that he took a train to Italy, and then he left for Italy, and he was there for a few months. And then by the time he was in Italy and kind of like trying to settle and find like some under the table type jobs, they were also compromised. It was no longer a safe place to be.
Yeah.
So then he made his way to France, which of course also became a not safe place to be. And he was ultimately taken to Drancy, which is a labor camp in the outskirts suburbs of Paris in France. And then he was from there sent to Auschwitz and was killed there. So he really was on the run there for a few years. He was killed in 1942. So from 1939 to 1942, he was on the run. His communication with my grandmother and my great grandmother was really sporadic. It was in the mail. My grandma said that all the mail was being censored and read. So there wasn't a whole lot he could really say other than, I'm okay. And then, of course, the communication stopped, and they really didn't learn until after the war where he ended up. And actually, interestingly enough, through that process, the Viennese government really came down on my great grandmother and made her divorce him while he was absent from the household, and said that they basically weren't going to allow her to work or do anything if she was still married to a Jewish man. And so going back to the complications of my grandmother is that her mother was not Jewish, but her dad was. And so in her birth records, she was considered a Jewish child. And then, of course, the Gestapo and the Nazis had a name for, kids of mixed blood, and they were very derogatory towards them. And so my grandmother, through the IKG in Vienna, I figured out that she has a conversion when she got baptized. So she was I think she was 6 or 7 when she converted. And then that still posed a problem for her though. So she was, segregated in school and had to sit with other kids who were of mixed descent. She had to bring in her genealogy, and there were a lot of questions about, her background and where she came from and who her dad was. And so, it was in 1945, I believe, that they bombed her house. So she was able to stay in Vienna for a while and kind of get by, but she wasn't able to go on to college. She couldn't do anything that everyone else was able to do because she was not considered, Aryan or of pure blood or whatever they were, justifying it by. And so she actually left in 1947. So she was 20 when she left. And she took a boat, and then that was it. She came over here, and her mother stayed.
And where did she go to America? Where in America?
She went to San Francisco originally. And then she kind of made her way over to Virginia. And she married my grandfather in Virginia, who she actually met in Vienna. He was in the US Army or in the Air Force. And so they met while they were over there, and then they got married. And that's, my grandfather, who I actually never met. He passed away before I was born as well. But they were together for a long time. He spoke German fluently as well. So, so I think she felt very safe and understood by him.
Yeah.
And my grandfather was actually a writer and a foreign correspondent for the New York Times. And he did a lot of work on post-World War II things. So in our house, all of our bookshelves are just filled with World War II books.
Wow.
And really Hitler and Nazi history and information. And he really dove into that and wanted to really understand it and learn more about it, where my grandma kind of pulled back from it because I think it was just too painful for her to revisit.
Yeah. What a story. When you're telling me, whenever I hear all these stories, it just sounds like a movie. It doesn't sound like anyone could actually go through that. But I know it, of course it happened.
It felt like for a long time, what's interesting about this whole process is I always felt like that story was unique to me. I'm like, oh, my grandma came from Austria, and, our family, was victim to the Holocaust, and my grandmother, had to leave and things like that. And then I meet all of these people who have the exact same story as me, who are going through the exact same process. So it's this very strange bond to have with a bunch of people. And obviously it's very sad and tragic, but at the same time, it's nice that Descendants of our ancestors and everything are so interested in like preserving our history and our memorial to them. So that's
Yeah,
been the nice part of it.
for sure. It feels, I don't know the right word, like almost like cosmic that I've connected like with you and other
Hmm.
people. It feels really cool and like of course devastating why we're all connected, but also like I think we calculated that our families like lived like near like miles apart in Vienna.
Yeah.
Like I think it was like 1.5 miles, or it was like very
Yeah,
close.
it was.
um that sort of thing like is so fascinating to imagine. Like our ancestors, even ancestors sounds so far away. Our family could have like walked past each other or even interacted, and
Yeah.
it's crazy. I connected with another woman from the group, Emily, and her we just Skyped. I've been writing a screenplay about this experience, as you've read,
Yeah.
and I interviewed her for the, because I just wanted to talk to some more people going through the process and trying to make the script realistic. And we discovered like randomly that, well, not randomly, but that her so her grandma dated my grandfather when they were like they
Oh my
were
gosh, I
like,
didn't know
yeah.
that.
I and just hearing that, and when we were talking we didn't even realize that, but then like I was just asking her questions and then we ended the call. But then like her mom was able to connect the dots and like knew of my grandfather and that they dated, like that, like they were each other's first like relationship, like when they
Yeah,
were teens.
that's so
um
sweet.
yeah, and that they happened to have like a photo of my grandfather like in their possession, and like I think they did, or at least they I think they sent me a scan. So just, and they went to this apology dinner that so I
That's
didn't
right.
go. Yeah. I didn't go. I was in high school, and I think at the time, I don't know, all this stuff wasn't as meaningful to me. Now I would have been like, oh, I really want to go. But at the time, I think I had finals or something in high school. Um, so they went to this, my mom went with my great aunt and my uncle to this apology ceremony at the school that kicked them out in 1938. So like when Anschluss happened.
Yeah.
And so they were sent to this, like they were kicked out of their regular school, my grandfather and my great aunt, they were kicked out. They were sent to this like all Jewish school, and then eventually they had to just escape. So anyway, the school that kicked them out, maybe that's not the right term, that expelled them, I don't know.
Yeah.
They had this apology ceremony. And anyway, when I was interviewing Emily, she was sharing that they went to an apology ceremony like the same year, but we thought they were different schools. But it turned out basically that they all went to the same apology dinner, and that there were pictures of like my uncle and like Emily's family and the photos, and
Oh wow.
just the overlap, just the fact that, there are like 1,000 plus people in this Facebook group, and the person I ended up interviewing like knew my family, which is just really
Yeah.
crazy.
That is like you said, cosmic.
Yeah,
You're like,
it really
of
feels,
all the people in the world.
it feels very like destiny. I don't know, wild. That just feels really cool. But yeah, it's also like this, as you were saying, that yeah, it's just a sad way to be connected to other people.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
also Vienna is, when you think about like a city, so most of the people in our group, or for the majority,
Yeah.
their ancestors were in Vienna. We're just talking about a city, right? Like
Yeah.
even the size of Austria is so much smaller than the United States that
Right.
for people to interact would be, especially in the Jewish community, would be a lot, the chances would be a lot greater.
Yeah.
Um, I've even had interesting things. When I went through a lot of my grandmother's things, she has a book called As the Waltz Was Ending. A lot of people read it when they were in middle school or high school. And it's about a ballerina who's in Vienna and kind of talks about the devastating, occupation of the Nazis and what it meant for her, how she watched Austria really change into this dark place. And anyway, I have the copy of the book, and I opened up the front and it said like, to my dear friend Trudy, like, let us never
Wow.
forget all we endured in Vienna, like, love Emma, who is the author. And I was like, wait a minute, like, the author who wrote this book, my grandmother just like casually knew because they went to the
Yeah.
same school or grew up together. Because it is a small
Yeah.
community, really, versus what we're used to here, where it's just so massive and spread out.
Mhm.
So that is one of those times where you're like, wow, like any of them could have interacted with each other or known each other.
Right.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think about. Yeah, so weird that we have social media, and I'm not usually a big fan of Facebook, but this group has really been special. So
Same. Yeah. And I'm like really excited when people get their notices, or like someone has a breakthrough, or like even seeing like there's been a few times that I've relied on the help of people in the group when I was looking for like a document, and everyone is just really eager to jump in and tell you the resource. And a lot of people have even offered to like look it up for me. One of the early days that I was in there, a guy just like was like, give me birthdays, like give me names, I'm going to run with it. And he found a lot of things that I had like hit a roadblock on and couldn't find in my research. And so I was super appreciative to like how helpful everyone was being from their own experiences in it.
So true. Yeah. A lot of people seem like, they're getting this information, of course, to apply, but also it's like very meaningful and interesting to them, and kind of like a sad but fascinating scavenger hunt of, trying to find this information. But there's something so interesting about being able to do all this research from so far away. Like it wouldn't have been possible so many years ago, just being able to like, find, to apply. I think they ask you like, was this a question? They ask you where your family lived in Vienna, or you provide the address. And we did know that. And it actually we would have been able to find it out even if my great aunt hadn't been around, but she was alive, and she had an amazing memory. And she was like, this is my address. Like, she just remembered. And then you just go on Google Maps and you can, street view, and you can just like see what it looked like. And just like incredible that that's a possibility, that we can do all this from thousands of miles away, and just see this, I don't know, just seeing that building, like, I don't know, it's crazy. It's still there. It looks very similar.
Yeah.
Versus here as well in America, if you look up the address, it might have been torn down by now, or, Oh, I meant to ask before. So did you grow up with religion, if you're comfortable? And so you didn't grow up Jewish. You grew up, you grew up Protestant.
Yeah. So it's kind of all over the place in terms of what my family is religious in terms of religion. However, my grandmother specifically, so she was more, I would say she was more spiritual. And I know that my great grandmother became very religious in her older years. I think she had just been through a lot, and like, staring down, being elderly and things like that. She really became close to religion. And I believe she was I think she was Lutheran, because she wasn't Catholic. And I always thought that was interesting, because Austrian is so predominantly Catholic, or was back then as well. But my grandmother was very, very spiritual. And in her later years, she was Unitarian. So she was very like, free thinking in that aspect, and just more spiritual. I think she had just seen a lot in her life, and really put her energy into like connecting to whatever she whatever she could, really.
It's interesting, the religious piece, like I wanted to share about my family in Vienna. Like they were Jewish, but it was not a big part like of their religious life. Like when I was interviewing my great aunt before she passed, like I think my grandfather did have his bat mitzvah, but other than that, like I think they had a Christmas tree in the apartment. Like they were very pretty secular, I'd say. They were Jewish, so I think they were Jewish, but they really were part of like mainstream society. And I don't think they went to synagogue very often at all. I think they got like a few Jewish holidays off from school, but so I think it was an extra surprise for them, because they had so assimilated into Vienna, to have to leave, because I think they considered themselves Jewish, but just like, it just wasn't a big part of their religious life. So to be like pointed out for, to be persecuted for that. But, it's not just a religion, it's also like an ethnicity, it's like an ethno-religion. So I don't know. I just wanted to add that. I always thought that was really interesting that they had a Christmas tree. Like we don't have a Christmas tree, although I love Christmas. And they did. But then when my grandfather came to America, he actually became more religious, which is interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah, so I think he was way more involved in Judaism then. I don't know to what extent, but I think he like went to synagogue a lot more and befriended a lot of other Jewish people around his community and things like that.
Like for my great grandparents and my grandmother's mother and father, the impression I got was, my great grandparents were married in a synagogue. And like I said, my grandmother was technically born Jewish. And so I think, I'm trying to think that they got married in 1924, I think. And by the time, my grandmother always mentioned that her dad was Jewish and that, they didn't celebrate Hanukkah, but it was very prominent on her dad's side of the family. So his parents were very religious and he had grown up very religious and Jewish. And it, like a lot of stories you hear during this time, like a lot of people could kind of see the writing on the wall as to what was happening with the persecution of Jewish people unofficially. And just by my own speculation of kind of like the events and my grandmother getting baptized and things like that, it kind of feels like they were trying to make sure that she was established, as a Lutheran or whatever, to kind of avoid any sort of what was to come, because she was born in 1926, so by 1933 you've already got the uprising of the Nazi party and a lot. And I mean, of course, that's not to say that the Jewish faith and population hasn't been discriminated against since the beginning of time. And in this case, it just was like, I think in Europe a lot of people were feeling it pretty early, and I think that's why too, like with our law for our citizenship, like it's 1933 to 1955, because those are like the really prominent years that you're seeing that come about. And so in 1933, my grandmother's very young, and I think they were kind of making a decision about how they were going to go forward, like as a family. And my great grandfather appeared to be, at least from my grandmother, in his, what she knew of him, to be very like undecided with his religious faith at that point. So and yet that didn't matter. So like you're saying, so even with your family, like they're not, it doesn't matter. It just, as long as it's in your blood, that's all they care about. So
I would imagine too, that I don't know if this was a conscious decision or subconscious, but like, them having a tree and all those things, like it probably felt safer to do that. I don't know. I mean, I also, as a person in 2021, like I love Christmas and I grew up loving Christmas. I'm not like, oh, it makes me safe to love, I don't know, but
sure.
But I think
you can totally see it.
Yes. That's what I'm trying to say. I think at the time, like, I don't know. I'm curious, like why they did those things. So and I wanted to say as well, when you're mentioning the synagogue and them getting married there, didn't we find out also that like our families got married? Is it at the same synagogue? Is there just like one big Jewish synagogue?
I think so.
Vienna?
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of, maybe all of us, if we have family from Vienna, had family that got married there. But I don't know. I thought that was really interesting and kind of cosmic.
I did too.
So I must have visited. I don't know. I was going to say I don't know if we went to that synagogue when I was 14 when we went, to Vienna. Have you been there?
To the synagogue? No. I actually, because I found out about it like during this time. So when I go back, I definitely want to go. And if I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it is the one that was not destroyed during Kristallnacht. Okay. So it did not like suffer significant damage. So it would be kind of preserved in its original form, which would be nice to see. The one with
like, it's like blue, dark blue, I think. Doesn't it have like a cool ceiling?
On the ceiling. Yeah. I think it's the Stad Temple.
Yes.
I'd have to look it up, but
that sounds right. When I was 14 and we went there, we just went to a bunch of different European countries. My dad had a sabbatical, so we were just going to a lot of places. I can't even really remember. I think we were only in Vienna for a few days even. But now I'd be like, oh, I want to go to like every single place that we've researched. And I think we may have went to the apartment, but I think it's near like an art museum. So we like happened to be where
Nearby.
nearby. But I don't even know at the time if we acknowledged that we were there, but I think we
Sure.
were there.
Was like when you went on that trip, I know that you were 14,
Yeah,
so it's like a
a long
different
time
speed of
ago.
trip.
Yeah.
But did your mom like call out any of the like significance of like, her dad being from there, or was it just kind of like a stop through?
I can't remember specifically, but I'd imagine I'm sure that she would have mentioned it. Like she's been in, she's told me a couple of stories from that, of him escaping. Like I've heard that story so many times growing up. So I'm sure she brought it up, but it wasn't like the main purpose of our whole European trip. We went to a lot of really sad, we went to a lot of Eastern European countries, and it's a lot of like sad places to visit. We actually went to Auschwitz. We went there.
Oh, I've never been.
Yeah, very, of course, very upsetting. So we went to a lot of the Jewish sites in Europe are just very, very sad, but we did do a lot of that. Not the only activities we did, but whenever we were in a place, we'd usually go to like I feel like we would have gone to Stott Temple if it were possible. Cause we did I remember going to a lot of synagogues all over the place, if there were like a tour or something. So yeah, but how many times have you been to Vienna and Austria?
So when we were younger, my whole family went, my brother, my cousins, everyone. And it was apparently like the trip of, the century, because they rented a car and they went and saw where Silent Night was written. And they had like this really like transformative, like Austrian Christmas there. And I was too young to go. So I might've been like 7 or 8. And so I stayed back. And this is it's a really hard point for me because I never got to go with my Omi, which was probably like my biggest regret of my life. She got sick when I was in my early 20s. And so it was really hard to get her back there. Every year she went for like a month and then some, a little bit longer to stay with her relatives. And it just like fed her soul to go back there. And her trips had to stop probably when I was like around 20. And so I didn't get to go over with her. And the first time that I went by myself, which was a very like, a very meaningful trip. I took back her ashes with me to bury at our family's house in Vienna. And I probably went back, I don't know, maybe 10 months after she passed away and took them there. And so we had like a small ceremony for her and everything. And it was really, it was probably the perfect first trip for me to go if it couldn't be with her. But, it was also like incredibly sad. Like the whole trip was just really sad because I don't think I've ever been to a place before and felt so connected to something or someone. Like when I got into Vienna, I was like, I just have never felt that way before. And I could see so much of my grandmother and like everything I've known my entire life. Like it was very, and I imagine like for you to go back as an adult, like knowing what you would have like a really overwhelming emotion going there. So I really wanted to go, well, as you know, for the Holocaust Memorial unveiling next week. And that would have been really great to be there for it too. But yeah, it was a really emotional experience, but I'm glad that I did. And that was my first trip over there.
Yeah. That's really beautiful that you went and took her ashes, but I'm so sorry, of course. I was going to ask, like, it sounds like Vienna was really important to her. And do you think she would have been like supportive of you becoming Austrian?
Yeah, I do. I think that my uncle said about my grandmother that she instilled the love of faraway places in all of us. And she traveled a lot. She was a travel agent by profession. And so she had been everywhere and done everything. And I think if she knew that I had the opportunity to not only connect with my Austrian, history and roots and family, but also to like have the opportunity to live abroad, she would be happy for me to accept the gesture from Austria. However, I think she too would have some not like hesitation, but I think that it would be a complex one for her to work through in terms of knowing that a lot of people lost a lot and were betrayed by Austria. So
Yeah.
it's a good symbolic gesture. And I think she'd want me to take advantage of it for the big picture. But I think she would still take time to recognize that like Austria really did people wrong in terms of, I guess for a long time, what I should say is that I kind of grew up a little bit naive about Austria's role in the Nazis taking over. I kind of thought that they were just like taken over against their will. And
Yeah.
what I learned from like my grandmother's accounts were that a lot of like my grandmother's neighbors and classmates and things were opening up the doors to the Nazis with like open arms, and we're like really excited about becoming a part of Nazi Germany. And so I think that there's a lot of people living there whose also descendants are from there, which you can't hold against anybody. But I think she would just be a little bit weary of that because she does have a complicated like love for them. I think that's how a lot of people, you read everyone in the group who gets their acceptance and they all work through like that complicated feeling that their ancestor would have, knowing like they'd be like, yeah, they might want me to take advantage of this, but also at the same time, like it's acknowledging like a really deep, dark past of Austria and what they're having to correct. And I will say though, that knowing what I know now, and Austria has like really come out to take a lot of responsibility for it, at least like in the last few years, where they're, like their exhibition at Auschwitz, where they're claiming their responsibility in the tragic events of the Holocaust and things. So I think, they're moving in the right direction in terms of like taking responsibility and being transparent about it. So
Yeah, that's really good.
She would appreciate that.
Yeah.
What about you? What about, I guess it would be hard to
Yeah.
say, but
About my grandfather,
yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, because I never knew him. I think he did go back a little bit. I would imagine it. I doubt he'd be like and I don't know, I didn't know him, but I doubt he'd be like adamantly against it.
Yeah.
I think mixed feelings, like you're saying. And as you were talking, like, yeah, I grew up, so I knew a lot about the Holocaust just from school and synagogue and our family stories. But I never really thought about Austria being complicit. Like, as you were saying, I grew up being like, oh, Germany, that's the country I fear. This is actually in the questions I wanted to discuss, like ancestral trauma and being afraid of Germany to an extent. I grew up, if you'd asked me 10 years ago if I was ever going to go to Germany as a on vacation, I would say no, because I think I still, obviously I saw it through the World War II lens. I saw it as a place that I just never wanted to go. I was frightened. Like, I think consciously I knew that we live in modern times now and most people aren't like that anymore, but I was just really scared. I grew up, every so often having a Holocaust nightmare, being in a camp or whatever. So yeah, when I heard Austria, I didn't have as much like fear attached to it. Like, when we went on our Europe trip when I was 14, we went to Austria but we never went to Germany. Like that was a deliberate thing. So yeah, I think as I even learn more, I think I'm going to be quite disturbed by Austria's, not being innocent the way that they claimed they were for a really long time. So yeah, it's interesting. I think also just in movies that we're exposed to about this time, it's often just about Germany, or German, a story there. There's Sound of Music and things like that. But I don't think I consciously even understood that Sound of Music was in Austria when I was little. I mean, I must have heard it.
Sure.
I thought of it as like a German story, So that's really
I think it's really interesting too with you talking about being scared of Germany because, obviously Germany has really fallen on the sword in terms of taking the responsibility, of course. But I think it's also really interesting that like my grandmother, she ended up living in Germany maybe like in 1962, so not like too far. removed from that because my grandfather was traveling as a journalist, and my uncle was born in Germany. So I I've always been interested with her relationship with Germany, because while she didn't necessarily like slam the country as a whole, there was a very distinct difference when someone would mistake her for German. That was like a big point of contention. She was always very quick to correct somebody on her accent, and things like that. And so I think she was, I think that goes into like the category of like her, love-hate relationship with Austria, in that, she was really proud to be from there, and like, but also it was like hard to stomach some of their responsibility with that as well. But the distinction between being from Germany was very different to her. And I think that people are really proud to be Viennese and to be from Austria, just as an aside. And so I think that like mistaking them with German puts them in a whole different category that makes them uncomfortable. And so I've always found that interesting as well. It's like what you said about there not being a lot of videos about the Austrian citizenship, but there are a lot about German. It's like a lot of people have zero knowledge of Austria, unless they're like mixing it up with Australia, or, they're referencing The Sound of Music, like we said. But other than that, like, there's not a lot of literature or mainstream movies or shows that like take place in Austria or even reference it. There's a lot of people, there's more, I would say, like historical figures that come from Austria that people might not even know they're Austrian, but they did come from Austria. So, of course, people are going to mention like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but there, you have other notable people who kind of put Austria on the map, Sigmund Freud. And so anyway, I think that that's a really interesting piece too, is that like when I read your screenplay, it's like, this is so interesting because it is taking place in a equally magical place to anywhere in Europe, but for some reason just does not get the same type of like admiration or love in the mainstream recognition.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So you've really hit the market to like get in there with your screenplay.
Just an aside about like the German language in mainstream like American content that I've seen. 99% of the time the villains are always German with German accents or speaking German. So even the language, I think I grew up being kind of frightened of. Like, it wasn't something I wanted to learn until recently. Like I was watching Die Hard for the first time with my parents last night, and the villains of that are German, and I just thought that was interesting. I think just like it's just part, I don't know, I feel like there are often German villains, and of course with World War II movies as well, whenever they're speaking German, it's often like screaming it in a very frightening, upsetting way. So I think just as Americans, we view the language as very harsh and for me, kind of frightening before. But now I think it can be really beautiful depending on who's saying it and what's being said and all of that. So I don't know, that's interesting. I just find it surprising that I'm even like trying to learn it at this point. Like now it would be amazing to be able to be fluent, but 15 years ago, I would have been like, no, that language is not something I want to learn. So
I definitely agree with the German language piece too, because it is always depicted and like, it's like, it's a lot of jokes focus on the fact that it is like really harsh and really aggressive sounding. But you're right. Like the more you learn German, it is really a beautiful language, depending, like you said, how it's spoken and what you're saying. But it's not, like when I heard my grandmother speaking German, it wasn't in the same context or, like scary. Like it's depicted a lot. But I think it's definitely like, it's typecasted into this like really aggressive like militant type language. And it's really funny. I watched an interview with Christoph Waltz, who is from Austria, and they were asking him what the difference between Germans and Austrians were, and like specifically with language and like behavior and things like that. And he was saying that like the Viennese and the Austrians are like a waltz and Germans are like a battleship. Like, and so that didn't necessarily, that didn't necessarily like help the case for the German language. However, I just thought that was funny that like even between them, like they have their own opinions of each other and like the way they come off and things like that.
I'd be really interested. I was trying to like find podcast episodes about the differences between modern German culture and modern like Austrian culture, and there's really not that much. I found like one podcast episode that I listened to just about because there must be, you know, cultural differences, but there's only just information really online, or a lot more about German culture.
I wonder why that is.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying to remember what I heard on the podcast. There was kind of like, I think she was talking about some kind of like rivalry a little bit between, you know, the modern countries today. Like, I don't know if the comparison could work at all, like United States and Canada, or I don't know. But yeah, super interesting. And definitely there needs to be more like cultural comparison videos I would make them if I lived in Austria, but you should, when you move there. Or you plan? Are you planning? So you still do want to move there one day? Is that the?
Oh yeah, for sure. For, you know, even though I don't need it for paperwork purposes, I still want to have like a pretty good level of German before I go over there. Having gone there, like between going to Amsterdam, Berlin, and then Vienna, I definitely struggled with the most in terms of English being, you know, spoken regularly. I think enough people speak it that you could definitely get by, and I think a lot of people live there who do just fine. But out of like respect for the culture as well, and the people, and wanting to like assimilate and get a job and things like that, I definitely want to be at a place where I'm a little bit more prepared to at least get over there. But yeah, I definitely want to move there. It's something that's always been on my radar, at least to move abroad. And I think Vienna is just really beautiful. Obviously, you know, it's been ranked the most safe and livable city in the world for like 10 years. And I got that. Like, I walked around at night and I felt totally safe, which is not something I could say about almost any US city. And it's much more affordable compared to here in terms of like having an apartment or a small house even in the outskirts of Vienna, and then knowing I have like a support system over there, like with, you know, my family that lives there. It's in the works, but I definitely have been like I want to make sure that like everything goes through with citizenship, everything's like smooth, and then I can start to like tackle the next set of goals to get over there.
We didn't share this, but we're both still waiting for citizenship at this point. So I'm 5 months and a couple weeks. Well, how do I phrase this? It's been about 5 months since my application has been complete in Vienna, and my mom's application. It depends when you're counting. There are all sorts of like different, like when the count begins. It's been way longer, of course, when I like first filled out my declaration. And how long has it been for you?
Yeah, I filled out the declaration in like February, and had I known a few things that I didn't know now, like about birth certificate requirements, things like that, I could have applied a lot sooner. But I applied on the 9th of April. So it's been over 6 months. Like, I'm going into the 7-month mark, but it sounds like it's nearing the end. Which is great.
Really close, I think.
I hope so.
You're like, we calculated, you're like a month ahead of me, right? Depends when you're calculating the beginning date. I've just started to calculate since our applications are complete, because it makes it, I don't know, seem like I haven't been waiting as long, but
sure.
But yeah, I think you'll hear back. Like, it could be any day.
That would be really exciting too, especially since it's like I applied to the DC embassy, so I'm right nearby, so I can just go in there and get it, which would be really cool.
That'd be so exciting. And the passport moment, I feel like, is going to be really nice just to have that. It's crazy. I'm really curious how long it'll take.
Do you think you would ever move over there?
In different like life circumstances. So like, I have health stuff going on, so I don't really have that freedom now, but in different circumstances, like, yes, I would love to go. Maybe to Vienna, because I feel like that would be when I dreamed of, going to Europe, years ago. Just, I always loved the idea. Vienna wasn't like the place that I had in mind, but now I think it would be a lot more significant to me, and somewhat depending on life circumstances and what I'm doing. I at least would love to live there for like a little bit. I think would be really interesting and significant. But yeah, the fact that we now have access, or we will have access to the EU, is just like mind blowing.
Yeah,
like
it really is.
It's hard to believe. Like, of course, I would still be applying if Austria were just its own place with, you know, not part of the EU. I would still 100% apply, but that bonus of just having access to so many other countries I've dreamed about is wonderful and such a gift.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So we'll see. But at this point, I just decided to apply because I guess you never know when citizenship laws change, and I just wanted to get the process started. And I'm really like, my mom also doesn't have plans to move there. But at first she was like, should I apply? Should I not apply? But since I was applying, I think we just decided to apply. Might as well both apply. So yeah, I mean, we'll see. And so you're applying, your brother's applying. Those are the only people currently who are applying right now.
Yeah. And my mom, she had just gotten married this year. So she changed her name, and it was going to be like a logistical nightmare to get like new documentation. Like she got married in like August, so everything has changed. And so anyway, she said like once ours goes through, it would be so easy for her to just like do her own paperwork now that her name is figured out. And that she would do it, and it would more be for like ceremonial, purposes, or like, in honor of my grandmother. And if I were to live over there, to give her the ability, like if she ever wanted to visit for more than 3 months or something like that, then she would have that opportunity. So
totally. Yeah. I remember researching before, like I knew that this was a possibility. Just like, how long can I stay in Europe? Like I remember researching to like leave that, oh God, I'm going to get the word wrong, like the Schengen area. Yeah. Is that how you say it? I don't know. And then you can like come back in. And I remember like reading a whole blog post about it and being like, that sounds so stressful. So yeah, it's such a gift. I meant to say before, like I should take notes as you're talking, because I have like a lot of different ideas as you're talking. But about learning German, even though we're not required to learn German, like I kind of do feel like I have a responsibility, especially if I were to move there. But I feel like it feels weird to not immerse myself at all if I'm like given this gift. I mean, I do think it's what was I trying to say? But yeah, I do think that like learning about the culture, learning about the language feels like an important part of this process, even though it's not required, basically.
Well, and it like, I'm sure you're similar, that you've always had like the desire to learn another language. And this just kind of points you in the direction to go, okay, well, why wouldn't I learn German then? Totally, because you kind of look at them and you think about like, where would I apply this? And, if I'm going to learn French, am I going to be in a French speaking country, or is it just to like have this in my like toolkit? But to learn German is like deeply personal for both of us. So, and, to want to live, even if, you did end up living in Germany or even in Switzerland or other places, like you can still apply German. So that just makes a lot of sense to me too. Sure, it is our responsibility to learn the language.
I do feel that way. Yeah, for sure. We've covered a lot. This has been really fun. Is there anything else we should talk about?
We could talk about Dirndls.
Yeah. It's on my list.
Mainly because I have a prop. I have my Dirndl picture.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. So cute. Baby Dirndls. So have you ever owned one? Like, well, I guess maybe not.
No, I haven't. I want to own one. But no, I grew up, associating them with Oktoberfest pretty much was the only thing.
I think a lot of people do.
Yeah. And I've always thought they were beautiful, but I now have this deep need to own one, even though I don't know what I would do with it besides just wear it,
other than just have it.
So Kendall and I have been, for the viewers, like sending back and forth like dirndls we like from a few different websites, and they're just so beautiful.
They are. And it's funny too, because like I was dressed in a dirndl for like my preschool pictures.
Yeah.
I mean, this dirndl has been rolled out at every like
I love
special
it.
event, like anything
Mm-hmm.
I've done in my life. And I got teased for it like really horribly as a kid. You're sitting with like all the preschoolers in their like little
Yeah.
sweatpants and stuff, and everyone's like, "What are you wearing in this school picture?"
Uh-huh.
Um,
I
but
love
my
it.
grandma brought it back from Austria, and
Wow.
it was just like so delightful for her to have like me dressed up in a dirndl and everything. And so it's funny because my boyfriend actually has baby pictures of him in a lederhosen as well.
That's so cute.
um yeah, and so anyway, a dirndl has like been on my mind, but I still have mine, and it's like this big or
Yeah.
whatever. And I have looked at them as well, obviously, because I send
Mm-hmm.
them to you all the time. And it's really funny because one of the members of my family who lives in Austria, when I was talking to him about the law, he was like, "Let me guess, you've been looking at dirndls online." And I was like, "Yeah, I have." Like, it's
Yeah.
something that it's something that I would like to have. Like, where I'm going to wear it other than Oktoberfest or like a celebration or a wedding, I'm not sure yet, but I feel
Right.
like I need to have one in case of an emergency.
100%. And maybe you could just like wear it around the house,
Yeah.
like
I
just
mean,
to the grocery store. Like, why not?
yeah. I mean, I try to figure out, I mean, I think people wear them to like weddings and a
Yeah.
few other like special occasions, but like, I feel like like it's easy for my cousin Oliver to say like, why do you need one? But it's like, do you have a lederhosen? You do. Like, that you need it for something, and like I need to be prepared. So I just want to have one on the
Yeah,
ready.
100%.
It's also like just really endearing. Like it's just
Yeah.
like a very like endearing thing. Like even I forget what event it was, but like all the people at the DC embassy like dressed up in their dirndls for like a
Mm,
special like a
yeah.
mask up challenge or something for the pandemic, and I was like, this
Yeah.
is so sweet. They
Yeah.
all have
Maybe
these.
there will be some kind of like event for all of us one day where we can
Yeah.
wear them and not be like super weird if everyone's just wearing like normal clothes. But
Yeah. Well, and too, like I'm like, okay, I want to go to Oktoberfest one year,
yeah.
like to go. So
Right.
if nothing
Right.
else, like I'll have it for
You get a
that
really cute
occasion.
picture. Yeah, I was thinking, oh, I'm gonna try to find this school photo. I have this photo that like looks so. It's not a dirndl when I was little, but it has like puff sleeves and it like kind of looks like you're. I'm gonna see if it exists or I'm just like making this up. But there's a picture, kind of reminds me of a dirndl from when I was little, but I don't think it really was, unfortunately.
But
Yeah,
it can be.
it can be.
We
I'll
can
say
just, yeah.
it was. Yeah, and in Judaism, there's not so many dirndls really, but unfortunately, are there any? We've talked, in our texts, we've talked a lot about different like movies we've watched having to do with this experience. I saw A Woman in Gold. Did you ever see that?
Mm-mm.
That was, I think you'd really like it. That was really good. So are there any like documentaries or I don't know, any like media that has been related to this experience that you've really found meaningful?
Yeah, I have watched and consumed so much
Yeah.
media related to the Holocaust in the past year going through this process. Some of it has just been more like, somehow I've never seen The Pianist, which I told you,
Oh
and
my
I
God. Yeah.
I thought I could get through that one because I was like so deep in my research about
Right.
the Holocaust and what had happened, to my great grandfather. But then I started to watch it and I was like, you know what? Like on this particular day, like I can't do this.
Yeah. It's
But
really,
I have watched some good movies that while they're hard to get through, obviously, because of the
yeah.
nature of what they are, it's still really aligned with like kind of some of the emotions I'm working through
Yeah.
by uncovering some of these things. I watched a movie called Sarah's Key. Have you seen that?
I think I did years ago, maybe. It sounds
It's
good.
based on a book.
Yeah.
um it was really good. It was really hard to get through, but the interesting part of that is that it sheds a lot of light on like the involvement of the French government,
Yeah.
with the Nazi collaboration, and that was particularly interesting for me, since my great grandfather spent like a good amount of time in France, and
Yeah.
working in their labor camps. and ultimately being taken away by them. So that was really interesting for me in terms of like timelines and how things lined up in that. But just a really moving movie in general about it. I'm trying to think what else I've watched. Life is Beautiful,
I don't think
which
I've
is
seen that.
that is a very, very good movie. But another
Look that
like,
up.
so these are all kind of like in the really like
Yeah.
tragically beautiful movie categories
Right.
that are really based in the
Yeah.
around the Holocaust or World War II. Um, Documentaries, I haven't watched any specifically about this. I did watch Dr. Ruth,
I
though,
was
per
just
your
thinking that.
recommendation, and that was great. And I I'm like really in awe of everything she's got. I like wanted to write her an email, just be like,
I'm
Dr. Ruth,
obsessed with her.
yeah, and like what I'm obsessed with her about like has little to do with her
Yeah.
what she's famous for.
Right.
Like her being a sex therapist. I just have so many other questions about like her life and escaping, from the Nazis. And that was really incredible. And that I appreciated when you sent that because
Yeah.
I had watched so much like really heavy content with like very little like uplifting endings. And that
Right.
one was like a really feel good while still like acknowledging like her trauma and her adversity, but like in a different light. Like you just really admired her strength. And it was also like there were lighthearted tones to it.
It was,
So that
yeah.
came at a good time.
That was I've saw it twice, like in a period of like a few days. And I feel like that's one of the best, like, I wouldn't call it like a Holocaust movie, but
Yeah.
it is her story. Yeah, I like sobbed the first time. It was so beautiful. And yeah, and just, yeah, that one of my favorite documentaries I think I've ever seen. Like it was just
Yeah.
really, really, really moving to see the kind of lives that people like create when they have to leave and when horrible things happen. And
Yeah.
so good. Yeah, no, I'm obsessed with her. Like, yeah, I follow her on Twitter now. I don't think she tweets very much, but I just think she's even the word inspiring isn't enough yeah, I love her.
Yeah. Well, with like every fold of the documentary, you're like, wait a minute, what? Like she also did this. Like it just like kept getting more and more unbelievable in terms of like what one person's like life could hold in terms of like experiences and like trials. Like she's just been through a ton and she
Oh
is
my
just like a
gosh.
very jovial upper
Her
90s
and
old woman.
when they like film her meeting up with like her first boyfriend,
Oh
like I
yeah.
got so emotional. And it's so beautiful that they're all doing, at least when the film was made, like so well, like physically and
Yeah.
mentally. Like the fact that they're able to, it reminded me of my great aunt. Like she had such a sharp memory, and it's really incredible to see. And like, what's their secret? Like, how are they so cognitively amazing at this,
Yeah.
later in life?
And she's still teaching, like, through all this, like
Yeah,
she's still teaching and
she doesn't want to
she's
retire. Yeah.
yeah. And the real big, I guess what would connect it all to me or what I took away from it that was like really really sweet but also hard was like her, like you mentioned, her grandchildren calling her Omi and them all sitting
Oh
around the table and
yes.
stuff. It was really hard because her like voice and mannerisms are very similar
Yes.
to like my grandmother, like very warm and like
Mm-hmm.
unassuming, and the fact that like you don't know exactly, like a lot of people would look at my grandmother and probably have no idea like a lot of the things that she
Yeah.
went through either, but she was just like a very gentle a gentle woman with a very sweet accent that like everyone would point out.
Yeah.
And yet she went through a lot. And one of the really funny stories that my grandmother always tells, kind of in line with Dr. Ruth being like, oh, and then I did this, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
what? Like, my grandmother, when her house was bombed, she was in, and she would just tell this very casually, I'm not
Yeah.
trying to wrap my head around my house being literally bombed.
Right.
But she went into the bomb shelter and was not feeling well. And she was down there with a bunch of people, and there was another guy in there who was also not feeling well. And so
Yeah.
people like started a rumor that they had like kissed and they had
Oh,
like
yeah, yeah,
spread it
yeah,
together.
yeah.
Well, anyway, she just like casually drops that this person was Oscar Werner, who I don't know if you know who
I
that
don't
is, but
know.
he's a famous actor, and he died probably like in the
Wow.
60s, but he was in a ton of movies. I think he was in the original Fahrenheit 451. And
Wow.
anyway, she was like, "Oh yeah, Oscar Werner and I were just down there," and like that's like a Dr. Ruth type story where you're
Yeah.
like, wait a minute, you're just like chilling in this like bomb shelter, while really horrific things are happening, and yet like you're next to an actor who you think is like really good looking, and like
Yeah.
it's just one of those very
So
unbelievable stories.
it sounds so cinematic.
Yeah,
Yeah. When I was watching, I was thinking how you called your grandmother Omi, because I've never used that word like for anyone in my
yeah.
family. Um,
And Oma is more popular. Oma
right.
and
I've
Opa. So
heard Oma
yeah.
before. My great aunt, like a lot of her mannerisms kind of reminded me of Dr. Ruth. Like when I was watching it, I was like, oh, this feels like very familiar.
Yeah.
This feel like the accent, of course, and just also Dr. Ruth's sense of humor kind of reminded me of like there was kind of a harshness to it.
Directness of
Yeah,
it.
yeah. But Dr. Ruth was still really endearing even when she said those things in the documentary. But yeah, it kind of reminded me. I couldn't put my finger on it exactly, but just the general like energy felt similar.
Yeah.
And independence, like hyper independence.
Sure.
I really saw that in my great aunt as well. And Dr. Ruth, of course, just wanting to still walk everywhere and do everything.
And she's tiny.
So tiny.
She's so tiny.
Yeah.
And she like, it's also really sweet. Something my grandmother would do too, that Dr. Ruth does, is like in the documentary, like a guy would be walking with her to escort her somewhere, and she would like grab his hand and like be like holding his hand and stuff. And like, that was just very sweet to me, that she was like, here, you lead the way. Like, I'm going to come with you. And it was just very endearing.
I could talk about that documentary for like a whole fake podcast episode. I thought it was really beautiful. And the grandchildren part also just really got me.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't have, a relationship with my Austrian grandparent, but just so beautiful that they all just seemed to really love each other so much. And in the documentary, it was really lovely. So I want to watch it again. Kind of. It was really good.
I do too. And like I said, I appreciated that one because I was like, oh, this is like still in line again with like what a lot of my focus is on right now, but it's just presented in a little bit of a different way that isn't so heavy to carry with me right now, because I've like a lot of this process has been really heavy for me in terms of and I know you've mentioned this before, but when you're on like Yad Vashem and you're seeing murdered next to your ancestors, and kind of like getting that that ending that you never knew, putting the pieces together of what actually happened to them and things like that. It's like a lot to process and to carry, and especially to do it alone, because it's not something that you can really just bring with you to talk to a lot of people about. People have always historically been squirrely about talking about the Holocaust in general. And rightfully so, for their own reasons. It's not exactly a topic that a lot of people know how to handle or process. But not like, not being able to like really talk to other people about that, or your friends or things. It's been kind of like a lonely, isolating process in that regard. So to find like media that was like, like I said, not as tragic with it was a nice reprieve from that.
For sure. A lot of the media, I mean, understandably, about that time is so devastating, and I can't watch Holocaust movies very often because I can't get out of this like post movie, like I don't know the right word, like a funk for a long time. And I bet it's deeper for us than it would be for like the average viewer. I mean, it's a very upsetting content for anyone, but it's just so strange to like see a movie that feels like it couldn't have possibly, it's a movie, it doesn't really happen. And then it's depicting something that really did happen. And it to that gruesome extent is just really hard to process. So yeah, it's definitely been like cathartic to like share these movies with you and stuff like that, like on Facebook chat, because it's just so heavy, and I like cry so easily from that stuff, which is, I
Yeah.
don't know. I'd be curious how the average viewer, I mean, it would be devastating for anyone, but yeah, there's a deeper layer to it.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's interesting because when I was I've always known this about my grandmother, but that she did not consume media very often, or books or literature that had to do with the Holocaust, because especially like in her older age, it was just something that obviously she didn't want to revisit very often. And, you know, it wasn't really at that point her responsibility to keep educating herself about it, whereas it is for like our generation. You know, she'd already lived through it. But what I found is interesting is in the interviews with my uncle is recommending, you know, a few books to her, like Night by Elie Wiesel and a few other things. And she says in there, like, I don't need to relive that part of my life. And she, even as she was older, she even was interesting about me, like trying to figure out more about our history, or like she really didn't like for me to go to the Holocaust Museum and like experience that. I think it just was really hard for her to know that I was going and looking at those things through a lens that like maybe brought more perspective or context to her own life. She never wanted me to go to Auschwitz. She was really clear about that. And you know, at some point I may or may not go, but I think because that's where her dad ultimately ended up, it was just too hard to ever go there and see that for herself. But yeah, I think that, like, you know, I would be interested to know how people who don't necessarily have a connection to it, how they view those kind of things as well, and like what their takeaway is.
For sure. Yeah, I remember going to Auschwitz. I think we went, there's like a smaller, are there two camps? There are two different places.
Birkenau.
Yeah, I think we went to the like smaller Auschwitz camp. I haven't reviewed, I might be saying this wrong, but there were two different places we could go, and we went to we were going to do a 2-day thing. And we just did one day because we were just all so drained from like day one. And I was like, I mean, I think it's so important, obviously, that it's a museum now and that people can see it and see the evidence. But yeah, it was a lot. And just that whole trip, I remember just going to a lot of really devastating Jewish sites, but that was like the most devastating one, of course. So yeah.
I speaking of Auschwitz and like there being Auschwitz and Birkenau, and there's I did read a book recently thinking about it, The Tattooist of Auschwitz. And
you told me about that.
That was a really interesting book. Someone had given it to me at work a few years ago, and it was one of those ones that like I kind of would pick up and read some, and then I'd have to set it down because it was just really, it was a lot to ingest. But it is really interesting because it does go into like a lot of the timelines of being there, and like, you know, kind of being in the role of him being a Jewish person in this camp, but also being given a role that makes him like kind of safe from other types of punishments and other and because of that, like a lot of the other prisoners see him kind of as like not a traitor, but like complicit with, you know, the enemy and things. So that was really interesting. And then of course we can't forget that both of us have read at least part of Julie Metz's book.
I need to read more of that for sure. It's just like we're saying, it's so hard to just immerse yourself sometimes in those kinds of books and movies and things, because they just stay with you for so long.
They do.
But yeah, I'm super interested, like how many people in the group are writing about this experience or like sharing it in some like public external way. I bet there are quite a few writers in the group, and I'm curious like what else people will do with this story.
I agree.
So I really, really want to get the movie made, and I need to revise soon because I've gotten some great suggestions from people. Thank you so much for reading it as well. And
sure.
Yeah, I just feel like it's a unique story that, you know, all of us share, but I haven't seen in the media yet as much, you know, maybe in like a couple of newspaper articles, but that's kind of it at this point.
It's also nice too, because I think you're coming at it at a good time, because like with everyone, including Austria, being like really transparent about their role in the Holocaust, whereas it was more of like a, someone might not have wanted to develop like a screenplay, like
Right.
going into the dark part of that, but because that's really like in the spotlight right now
Yeah.
and is like taking ownership for it, like that's a great opportunity to turn that into something else to kind of educate people about it, like in
Yeah.
a fictional but also
Yeah.
historical way.
It's an interesting position. Like my parent grew up here, like born
Yeah,
here. So it's like I still feel this, like, I don't know, ancestral trauma, I guess if you'd call it, but it's not as direct as it would be, of course, if my parent had gone through that.
sure.
So I don't know. I haven't seen that many. What I'm trying to say is I don't think I've seen any movies about people who had a grandparent go through that. Like, how does that pain and that trauma like affect future generations, basically, is what I tried to write about. So
Yeah, for sure. And I think that it's really interesting. I've thought about this a lot in terms of like why people aren't always necessarily interested in like where their parents come from, but like we're
yeah,
always really interested in like where like our grandparents, it like skips a generation.
right.
Um, because I wouldn't say my mom isn't interested in where my grandma came from, but I'm definitely more interested. And that kind of seems to be like a common thread, like
Yeah.
amongst generations. And so I'm curious why that hasn't been depicted more like through that lens of like wanting to know like where your grandparents come from, or like taking
Yeah.
like that really vested interest in like, a skipped generation. Um, maybe it's not as interesting, for my mom, like we're saying, because
Hmm.
our parents are from here. And maybe if my
Yeah.
mom had been from Austria as well, I would have more vested interest. But I think there is something about it being like a little bit removed that makes you like
Yeah.
really intrigued by it.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's super interesting. I was going to ask, like when we become Austrian, like, would you call yourself Austrian? Like, I'm curious about the like identity piece. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I would definitely like give it context.
Yeah.
Anytime people have asked like what I am, like in terms of like where do
Yeah.
you come from? Obviously I'm like, yeah, I'm American, but I only identify with my grandmother's history of being
Mhm.
Austrian. Other than that, everyone on my dad's side or whatever has been here since
Yeah.
forever. But I've always been really proud of that fact with her, that that my grandmother spoke German and she
Yeah.
spoke many languages, and she came over here. I have always appreciated like the like identifying as Austrian, in that like there was like this mental toughness that came from my grandmother, from her experience of coming
Hmm.
from there and having to kind of start over. So I identify with that, and I think with like given context, I would say, yeah, like I'm a dual citizen there, and
Yeah.
I, identify with that very much.
For sure. I think I would definitely need to, like, I would never be like, if I were meeting someone when I have this dual citizenship, I don't think I'd just be like, I'm Austrian. Like, I would really need to add some things in context.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd have to explain myself. But yeah, it's really interesting to be in the group and read articles and just like see how people view that identity piece, and how some people have said, oh, like, this is just an opportunity I'm taking. It's not, I've seen this a little bit too. It's not meaningful for me. Like, I've seen that a
yeah,
little as well, which is totally valid too. I understand that hurt and that pain. And I mean, I can at least understand it from, yeah, like I feel like it is meaningful, but at the same time, but I understand people are totally valid to say that.
sure.
Yeah. So that's interesting, because I feel like I am going to be the type of person that's going to like put it in my Instagram bio and that sort of thing, just because I don't know why. I guess just I find it exciting and something that will make me more interesting. But
Sure. I mean, it's funny because like going through the process, my boyfriend, I hear him talk about it like almost more than I do, because
yeah.
he finds it to be like the interesting part
Oh,
about
that's
me right
cool.
now
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
Like that, because people are really intrigued by the idea of having dual citizenship. And anytime I've ever met somebody who's been able to like go through a process via like, their
yeah.
grandparent, or like having moved somewhere and like fully like immigrated, but been allowed to have dual, like I'm always super interested.
Yeah.
in how they did that, and like how that works into it changes you, like it
Yes.
changes you, and it like we've said, it opens doors for you, like it makes you want to learn a new language, it makes you want to do all these things. So I think it does become a part of your identity, whether
Yes.
depending on how you look at it or how you take it, it becomes a part of your
Yes.
identity, whether you mean for it to or not. Like it becomes a big part of you, and it directs like what you want to watch, what you want to read, like your interests are like,
Yeah.
you and I have talked about watching shows in German and things like that. And I've watched shows in German this past year, going through the process that like I'm not sure that I would have watched otherwise.
Right.
And it like opened up another part of my brain or like my interest to be like, oh, I'm interested in this as well. But I might not have known that had I
Right.
not been like actively seeking out something in a German language.
Yeah.
And so like watching, like I watched Deutschland, and that has easily become one of my favorite shows.
I need to watch that. I haven't seen it
And
yet. Yeah.
it was just, yeah, it was one of those things that I was like, oh, I probably wouldn't have like sought this out or watched,
Right.
this much media in heavily subtitled content,
Yeah.
because it is like a commitment. But I really, I think that's how it works into your identity and like what you're going to do with it.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I know I definitely have been exposed to a lot more media than I would have. And now whenever I hear anything about Austria, I'm like, ooh, like
Yeah,
what's
you like perk
happening?
up.
Like we've
Yeah.
talked about, the Kurz fiasco and the political system there, which I'm still,
What we know of it.
yeah, I'm pretty clueless about it still. It's an interesting, I guess this is not what I was going to say, but an interesting component of this citizenship opportunity is now when we obtain it, we can vote. And
Yeah.
I don't feel like I should vote unless I really, of course, understand what's going on and
Sure.
system but I think that's a really interesting component because it's not like they don't offer like a class, like a culture class for us, but we can still vote.
Yeah.
So I don't know, do you plan on voting?
Well, I'm in the same boat as you, is
Yeah.
that like I need to really get a handle on what's going on and like where I identify. And
Yeah.
what I appreciate is that there's more than two political parties.
Yeah.
Or at least like, dominant ones. So you're able to kind of make like a more informed decision. But yeah, before I do any like sort of voting or anything, I definitely want to make sure that I understand what's going on and like, what best benefits the country. Cause I think it
Right.
would be easy to come over here too and
Yeah.
like hear certain terms or phrases and like think that that's the way things should go, but not realizing like the implications of casting that vote come with like a few other things. And so
Right.
I'm on the same page that I want to be like really clear. And I almost like wonder, besides independent research, like you're talking about like a class or something, but like how you could really get like informed or stay in the know of things
Yeah.
politically, like coming into a completely new landscape, like from,
Right.
scratch.
I wish Austria kind of like provided, I mean, not that they have to do this, but it would be really nice and like meaningful if we could take some kind of like immersion virtual class,
Yeah.
about the political system and about other cultural things. Cause it's the voting part is very surprising to me, but it makes sense if they're giving us citizenship, of course. I would not feel comfortable voting right now at all.
Yeah, no, me either. And yeah, I have a long way to go with that.
Yeah.
And it's like a responsibility given to us that I want to take very seriously. And I'm sure it is a concern to Austrian citizens to have like a wave of new people coming in and voting who, might not know what they're voting for or about. And so I do like acknowledge that worry for them because
100%.
I certainly don't want to, after like the political landscape in America, over the last like 4 to 5 years, I can understand how important it is, especially like for a country that's so small.
Right.
That just dictates everything.
That's
So
true.
yeah, that is, I think that's our next adventure is learning
100%.
about the
I feel
political
like
system.
I need to understand it. I was going to say, as we've discussed a little bit in chat as well, like it's interesting. Like, I wonder how immigrants feel here when they come here and view the political system and view the different people in power, and how, like, I'm so excited to become Austrian that I think I kind of have rose-colored glasses, at least partially. And so it's interesting. I wonder on the reverse side, like how people who are so excited to come here for this opportunity of, being American or whatever, view politicians and view policies differently because they feel so, I don't know, excited, or just they have rose-colored glasses still.
Well, it's interesting too, because you're going into voting in Austrian politics, knowing that like a few really key things are already like figured out and ironed out, whereas they aren't in the United States. So, you've already got healthcare, universal healthcare, and education, and these other things that are like really top of mind over here with like student loan debt and healthcare and insurance and things like that, which is what dictates a lot of people's voting where they sway. And so for us to kind of come in there and kind of look at like some of the things that they already have established that like we necessarily don't, vice versa, people coming here, whatever, I think that's a really interesting piece of it too, because like, you might end up finding that like you have interest in the political landscape over there for different reasons, because some of those things are out of the equation, or whatever it is that, you're really passionate about in your voting here.
That's a really good point. Super interesting. And how, Austria is often in like the top 10 happiest country, lists online, because they have a lot of those basic, well, for them, basic things that we don't have with like healthcare and things like that. And, like maternity leave, like longer maternity leave and paternity leave and all that sort of stuff. So it's super, I don't know, it's always exciting.
And they're super sustainable. Like they're like really big on sustainability, and being eco-friendly and like leading the way, even though they have such a small like footprint, like literally, and in their environmental usage way as well. They're such like a leader in sustainability and eco-friendly practices that's like another interesting piece of it, because obviously like, we have a lot of work to do on that too. So like a lot of that is like the driving force in their politics and making sure that like they're adhering to policy. So like of the little I know, like I do know like their major like ethos and where they align and what's important to them. And so it'll be interesting to like get granular into like the small things and figure out or like the medium things of where you need to vote and like what matters to you living there and being a citizen.
I'm really curious. I was going to say how, like if Austrians, like the average Austrian knows about this immigration law, like if it is a point of discussion, or it has been, just like if they know about all these new citizens. I mean, I guess it depends on the person, but I'm curious. I don't know, in the mainstream.
I'm curious how they feel about it.
I'm really curious, because I've talked to like one Austrian. I'm part of like the screenwriting Twitter community. I've met a lot of like writers through there, and there's an Austrian writer, and I like told him he has my script, he's going to give me notes, which, because I was like, you live there, you can like tell me if I'm, missing everyday cultural things. I just wanted him to like fact check everything kind of for like modern Austria, because I haven't been there for a long time. But yeah, I'm curious. I don't know if he'd even heard of it. I just told him, he was like, that's cool. But yeah, I'd be really curious about, or how Austrian Jews like feel, who still, I bet the population is quite small, but I know that there are Jewish people, living there.
Well, I think it's the one thing I do know about how people feel about it is that like a lot of Austrians who live abroad have not been able to acquire citizenship, like US dual citizenship, because Austria will not recognize their dual standing. And so I think when this law came out, there was a lot of publicity and a lot of PR around it because it was such a big deal. And I think the only thing I've really picked up on, like just through like reading Twitter threads and like kind of trying to get an understanding for what the conversation is around it, a lot of people, born Austrians, are frustrated. Not that people, like us of descendants can become citizens. I think they're more upset with the lack of legislation being passed for them to be dual citizens, like why it's still so strict and rigid. Because one of the other points I was going to make earlier is that like when I did look into living in Austria, like I was like, how great would it be to become an Austrian citizen before this law? However, you do have to renounce, like you can't have a dual citizenship. So we're in this like really unique group of people who gets to have dual citizenship without having a parent who was born there and things like that. And so I think that is a big frustration of Austrian citizens. And, rightfully so, because, they want to live other places and do things, but they don't want to necessarily give up their citizenship. But, like Arnold Schwarzenegger kept his, of course, in special cases. So I think that is probably like, if they had an opinion, that's probably where the sentiment is coming from, that they're just frustrated on their own behalf.
100%. That makes sense. Yeah. When I first discovered this opportunity, I was really worried that I was going to lose American citizenship. Like before I fully researched it, I was just concerned because obviously I would never, well, not obviously, but I would never want to give up. I'm not moving to Austria anytime soon, and I wouldn't want to give that up. So I'm really glad the law allows us to have multiple citizenships. And it's been really interesting in the group seeing how the idea of having multiple passports is not that unusual for some people. There are people in the group who also have Israeli citizenship and multiple citizenships from other countries. So that was interesting to me. Well,
what's also interesting about that too is that, like, in the group, a lot of people have talked about, if you're going to get any of your other citizenships, you need to do it now before you get your Austrian citizenship, because of that law that will, you'll lose it if you get another one. So I've seen a lot of people talk about like putting theirs on hold while they like pursue their Israeli citizenship or whatever it may be. So that's another interesting piece of it as well. Although I'm not eligible for any other citizenship, so I don't foresee that being an issue.
So that was another point I wanted to bring up as well, is I think a lot of people, because of the ancestral trauma and because of the history that we have, also want an extra citizenship for safety. I think it's a really interesting one as well. And it's a driving force for me too. It's not like that's the only main reason, but I think we've all learned that it's like, or not learned, but we've observed from like our family's history that it's really important to be able to get out of a country quickly and have a place to go.
For sure.
So I think that part's really interesting.
Yeah, I do too. And I think that's the piece that's really interesting, because like for us, we're seeing it as like a place that we can go and things like that. And then, we've talked about the people who are a little bit more apprehensive towards getting the citizenship, seeing it as like, why would I run to the place that made me leave kind of sentiment. So that's that emotion that they're working through. That is pretty complex.
Right. Yeah. Do you think, I think it's that whole piece of safety and always looking for an escape route, I think is a passed down. I don't know. I feel that way sometimes. Or like, I do want, like, I want to know I can like get out quickly. And I don't know. Before I was never looking into other citizenships just for that reason, but it's always nice to have a backup plan. I think I've seen that sentiment a lot in the group and other people because we understand how quickly, and this is a sad conversation, but how quickly society can crumble and how people can like turn their backs on their friends and neighbors really quickly.
And just how quickly like a group of people can get together with a general emotion of hate or against another group of people, and then you've got a situation similar to what led us here, and that stuff even here has become so much more prominent, like featured. And so I think a lot of people were feeling that. I think a lot of people at least in our group talked about that, like with a lot of like the rise of like terrorism and acts against Jewish people in the United States has been extremely alarming. And, not to mention, like, on the other hand, I think a lot of the people in our group who applied are from London or from England, and they're applying because Brexit kind of put them out, cast them out from the EU, where they really identified as a European. And a lot of people in our group have commented like, oh, I got this because of Brexit, because I needed a plan B, because now I've got, stuck over here in this area, whereas I had full, freedom to move around and things like that. So I think there's just a lot of layers to why people want like the plan B. And I think like in, what you and I are saying is like, it is nice to know that we have another place that we have a connection to that we can go to if we need to, and vice versa, like, coming back here and things like that.
Yeah, no, it's super. The Brexit piece, I'm glad you brought up, because yeah, it's interesting timing for that as well. And the fact that this is happening during a pandemic, just all the timing of it is really fascinating. That yeah, I feel like we brought up a lot of cool points.
Yeah,
So,
I agree.
Is there anything else you want to discuss? I feel like we can probably wrap it up.
Yeah, no, I think it's good.
How do you feel about The Sound of Music? Closing question.
Yeah, okay, I will say with The Sound of Music, I felt so passionately about this because like it's like one of the, when you like something that's like mainstream
Yeah.
or popular, and then everyone kind of like gets on you about it because they think it's lame to like something popular. I can totally see both sides of the coin where like, people think it's like really historically not inaccurate, but it's not like an accurate portrayal of Austria, and it's very like Hollywood. However, I talk about this with my brother, and we're like, my grandmother like loved The Sound of Music, and I think she loved it because it was like very comforting to her in a way that like it just I think like this is my card I use. Like if she's allowed to love it and she's from Austria and it like brought comfort to her, then who am I to like jump on anyone? And I love The Sound of Music. Like it brings a comfort to my childhood. I know it does for you as well. And like we've said 8 times in this talk, that people don't portray Austria in cinema. So to put something on the map like that in a way that if that's the way everybody identifies with Austria, like they're identifying with it. And so I mean, I love The Sound of Music, and I kind of get tired. I just get tired of, like the controversy around liking something in general. And, I think it's just the kind of like memory it brings to everybody is what you love about it so much, like not necessarily going through it like line by line to make sure that it like,
it's not a century.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I guess that's the most Austrian thing I kind of grew up on is The Sound of Music. Maybe not even consciously. Like I don't think if you'd asked me when I was 10, if I don't even know if I knew it was set in Austria, but I grew up watching it, and it's one of my mom's favorite movies. And it's one that I've probably seen it, like it's in the top like 3, like maybe most viewed movies I've seen it a lot. And and even though it is, it is about a really dark time in history, the movie it does manage to like celebrate Austria in a way, celebrate the good people, like they're the Von Trapps are a good family who do the right thing. And there's just a lot of joy in that movie for, they do have to escape, spoiler alert. And so if you haven't seen The Sound of Music at this point, then so yeah, no, that movie is really important to me. I would love to go to Salzburg just because of that movie specifically. And
that's the other point I was going to say. It's like one of those things where I know like it can be uncool to like something that's super mainstream or popular, or however people want to phrase that, but like it also brings a ton of tourism to the area. Like a lot of people, like I don't know that people or as many people would know to go to Salzburg just because but to know that The Sound of Music was filmed there, and that like kind of exhibits like Austrian culture is special. And I even think it's been talked about in the group before to say that like, people in Austria have mixed feelings about it, of course, like but it is like a big motivator for people to go there, and there's a lot of things to do there that revolve around The Sound of Music, like in that area. So there are like stuff, like it does bring that to the area, and I think that's a good thing.
I do too. I definitely want to go on a tour and experience it for sure. I've always loved going to the sites of movies, like in general. Huge cinephile, but That movie is very important to me and like very comforting, as you were saying. Like it's a comfort. And I love
Yeah,
Julie Andrews so much. So
I do too.
she's
Yeah.
like one of my icons. So yeah. So I wanted to pop back in here because we stopped recording abruptly. This is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. It was so fun to finally meet Kendall virtually. She's such a sweet person, and like we were saying, it feels kind of cosmic that we've connected through this process. Like my great aunt and grandfather could have interacted with her family. They lived mere miles apart. It's crazy to think about. The internet isn't just memes and people arguing on Twitter. Social media can really bring people together. So if you have any questions, feel free to comment down below. We're also happy to share any resources for those of you who will be applying or considering applying, or if you've already applied and quote unquote become Austrian, we'd love to hear from you too. Danke and Auf Wiedersehen.